This is an emergency unholy update after Iran's extensive attack on Israel for the first time in history, with hundreds of drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles, and also Israel and its allies with the multi-layered aerial defense system intercepts 99% of this attack. An unprecedented 24 hours here. I'm Yonit Levy of Channel 12 News in Tel Aviv.
And I'm Jonathan Friedland of The Guardian in London. Obviously, so much we are going to talk about. You've pointed out the two things there that I think are completely new about this. One, Iran attacking Israel's sovereign territory directly, not through proxies or intermediaries, but itself. And the second, an alliance, Arab countries, we'll talk about all of this, but Arab countries, Sunni Muslim countries, uniting to protect Israel from Iranian attack. Nothing like that has happened before. We're going to get into all of it, Yonit. I thought first off, though, you should just talk us through on a human level what it was like last night. It's now Sunday. I think there were people all over the world who have family, friends in Israel who are doing the same thing of holding their phones and getting text alerts and messaging relatives. Are you in the safe room? What are you hearing? Has the siren gone off, etc.? But you were living it. Just talk us through that before we talk, get into all the issues that come out of it.
Well, there was a buildup of about 2 weeks to this. We've been talking about this on the podcast as well, after an assassination attributed to Israel in Damascus, inside the compound, the Iranian compound, against head of one of the top people of the IRGC in Damascus and in Syria and in Lebanon, Reza Zahedi. He was assassinated 2 weeks ago, and since then, Iran threatening Israel directly to attack the country, saying this is an attack on sovereign Iran, and therefore the response will be an attack on Israel. And Israel gearing up for this, the United States gearing up for it as well. It was pretty clear that the minute Ramadan is over, then that is more close to when this attack might happen. Also, the United States saying quite clearly it will happen soon. So around Thursday and Friday, Israelis were already very, we'll say an understatement, concerned about what can happen. Now, what happened Saturday night is that at 8:30, the spokesperson for the IDF, Daniel Hagari, comes out and says there is a dramatic change, essentially, in the home front command instructions. There will be no educational activities tomorrow, he said Sunday, no Passover camps for kids, no gatherings over 1,000 people. Now, what he knew at that point and didn't share with the Israeli public yet was that the drones were already making their way towards Israel. This takes time. This takes about 8 or 9 hours from the moment that they are indeed launched in Iran. At 11, Jonathan, officially, the IDF said to the Israeli public, the drones are on the way. Now, we have to pause on that for a second. It's not that Israelis aren't used to attacks or to missiles, even drones from Hezbollah. You never have this kind of waiting pattern, right? When you're told, oh, the drones are on the way, they'll probably arrive around 2 a.m. and you'll have your sirens in the place that you live, essentially, and you'll know if you need to go to shelter or not. No one was sleeping in Israel from the moment that the IDF was saying this is the situation. It was also clear to Israel that this will be a simultaneous attack, so that Iran will also try to launch cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. The time varies. So for cruise missiles, it's about 2 hours. This is information I never thought I'd have. Ballistic missiles take about between 10 and 15 minutes. Depends where from Iran they are launched from. So this was all coordinated by Iran. And at 1:15, the IDF spokesperson, again, I remind you, no one in Israel was sleeping, not only the people who were anchoring the news at the time. 1:15, Daniel Hagari says to the Israeli public, there are missiles on the way from Iran. At that moment, even if you are the most, calm person on earth, your heart sinks a little, because this is the first time in the history of this country that Iran, that has been having, engaged in a shadow war with Israel for many years, directly attacks the country.
And so you mentioned that the concern was building even last week. People had already begun to sort of stockpile supplies. They were they were checking their safe rooms and so on. But that whole, that upping of anxiety, and as you've said, the notion of that long lead time, I think that is what shocked people, was people have an image of these things being sort of instant, that missiles are coming. The idea of these drones making this long, deliberate journey ticking away, coming closer and closer. You were having to sit in the sort of anchor's chair and really steer the nation through this. And I know this just from, people telling me that they were watching you, trying to read the expressions on your face to judge how anxious they should be. Someone said it's a bit like when you're on an aeroplane and you're looking at the stewards thinking, are they panicking? If they're not panicking, I won't panic. They were looking at, Yonit and thinking, if she's okay, I'll be okay. But as the night was wearing on, were there periods where where the mood was such that, hang on, this is not, this isn't a drill. This is something that really could be lethally devastating. As we're going to discuss, in the end, it didn't exact a death toll. There is one injury. Was there a point at which you felt you were bracing the country for potentially very serious injuries, or were the signs and casualties, or were the signs pretty early on that this was something that could be defeated in the air?
I knew that the aerial defense and the multi-layered and the fact that, the United States was there and the allies were there. I knew all of that, but you never know, with all of the greatest intentions, that one missile doesn't, fall in the wrong place. And you can't know at that moment. So of course you should be as calm as possible. But the reality is that you don't know. You just hope for the best. But you need to know the options. And again, it's a sort of, it's a delicate balance. On the one hand, you want to tell Israelis exactly what's happening, and let them be prepared for it, but also not have people in a panic mode. So it's kind of a delicate thing. I'll just,
Yeah. So let's get into the ways of reading it, and the two different interpretations that were already up and running as the night was unfolding. On the one hand, there is a version of this, and the reason why this debate is really important because it goes directly to what happens next. On the one hand, there's a view that says this was a huge triumph for Israel to defeat this attack so that 99% did not get through, that this Iranian assault was blunted. One injury, a Bedouin child affected by shrapnel from one of these incoming missiles, but otherwise none of the targets were hit in any kind of serious way.
Some damage to the Nevatim air base. Some damage
to that base, but otherwise not the kind of casualties and so on that would have been discussed. That is one way of reading this as a massive triumph, and it seems as if Joe Biden was saying to Prime Minister Netanyahu, take the win. This is a victory. You can say this is that you've deflected the attack. Iran threw everything at you and you managed to defeat it together with your allies. That's one reading. The other one that was again being talked about on social media and elsewhere at the time was that the success rate, as it was down to the fact that, yes, the allies joined Israel and America together, they were protected, but also that Iran was in some ways going through the motions, says people. This was performative, that this had been signaled long in advance, even down to the 8 or 9 hours people knew about the drones, that they knew that Israel and its allies would defeat this. They just needed to show that they were retaliating, that they almost didn't want to achieve much, rather they were in the business of sending a message. Now, those are two different interpretations, but on which interpretation you favor hinges the question of what you should do in response, whether you think this was job done or whether in a way Iran were thumbing their nose and knowing that they weren't even trying to, inflict lethal damage. What's your reading of that question before we talk about what should happen next?
So we need to keep two thoughts in our heads simultaneously. One is that this is an immense attack by Iran, okay? 160 or 170 attack drones, 36 cruise missiles, 110 ballistic missiles towards Israel. In the time frame that this attack happened, this is the most projectiles that ever were launched against any country. This is serious. This is a strategic issue. And the fact that Iran dared do this for the first time means a lot about Israel's standing. That cannot be ignored. So it's not just, there's no game played here. This is a serious attack. On the other hand, we have to say this today, right? Unprecedented, incredible operational capabilities by Israel and by Israel's allies. I think the issue of allies is really important here. It's very crucial, again, to the question that you asked, what is the day after, or how does Israel respond if it responds? That is an incredible thing. The United States, the UK, France, Jordan, importantly, In a way, also Saudi Arabia helping here. A few weeks ago, the cover of The Atlantic said Israel alone. We talked about that on the podcast. When I saw that, my heart sunk. But Israel is not alone. It's demonstrably not alone after this night. I think that's very clear. If it manages now, with a calm, reassuring diplomatic skill, to understand how to go forward from this and what to do, I think this is, as they like to say in the Israeli military, a crisis is also an opportunity. This is a huge opportunity. I'm not sure I answered your question, but
I completely agree with you about the opportunity, the diplomatic opportunity, this alliance that people have talked about for a long time, for years actually, of Israel and this sort of Sunni crescent against Iran has been talked about in the shadows, more or less openly. This was its sort of debut in public, if you like, in the most dramatic way. It shows the outlines of a proper military alliance, this so-called Middle East Air Defense Alliance. It's a real thing now. Mm-hmm. And now you could put diplomatic flesh on that framework and turn it into a genuine thing. Obviously, Israel would have to do things diplomatically for that to become real, in terms of the perennial thing of the Gaza situation day after and the Palestinian question, and offering a political horizon for that. But before we just get to that, I just want it sounds like to me you've answered it. I have to say your answer fits with my instinct, which is this wasn't just going through the motions or sending a message, even if the effects of it were like that once you involve cruise missiles, once you're aiming at Nevatim military base and aiming at Israel's F-35 fighter planes, they didn't design it so that it would be ineffective. They would have liked it to have been effective, and it's just because of that alliance that thwarted it. Yes. That's my reading. But this argument was going on in the small hours of the night with analysts around the world thinking, is Iran just deliberately, doing a calibrated response that isn't designed? But it seems like you're saying there, no, they really wanted to cause damage, and that was their plan.
Well, one more thing. I think I spoke to American officials who told me the number of ballistic missiles surprised us. We thought it would be half as much. Again, Iran did say very clearly what its intentions were. It could have not said anything and just attacked Israel. The fact that Israel was so well prepared, and most of this was intercepted beyond Israel's borders, right? I mean, that's pretty incredible when you think about it. Obviously, part of it is Iran also saying this is what we are going to do, but wanting to deter Israel and to not try anything again. Now, we don't know yet. I mean, we're talking less than 24 hours after this happened. We don't know what the response will be, if there will be a response. We don't know if Hezbollah, yes or no, will enter into this equation, right? Again, the proxies of Iran, this is still a volatile situation. It's unstable. But the first stage of it is that Israel managed to thwart this unprecedented attack.
And it's because of that Joe Biden and the Americans, and you saw it with the statements from John Kirby, the spokesman for the National Security Council at the White House, essentially saying, as I said before, declare victory, take the win, and leave it at that. That way we can say this episode is wrapped up. It's clearly what the Iranians wanted. They put out a statement while the drones were in the air. They put out a statement through their mission to the United Nations in New York saying, we hope this matter will now be concluded.
That's a chutzpah word if ever you had one, right? Still sending drones over Israel, but saying the matter is concluded as far as we see it, right?
I agree. Okay. That is an early, if we were doing them, that would be a chutzpah award for them. But they clearly see it that way. In a way, the United States is saying, we think too. You did your attack on April the 1st on the IRGC generals. They had their say back. You repelled it. Let's, draw a line under the matter. That's how they would like it to look. The argument that must be going on among Israeli policymakers, as I guess at it from here, is that if you do leave it at that, the risk is you look weak, because here is Israel's sovereign territory being attacked. First time actually for 33 years since the first Gulf War, Scud missiles. We all remember that a long time ago in 1990. Until then, it's been a kind of taboo in the Middle East. You don't hit Israel directly on their soil. They've done that, the Iranians. In the usual logic of deterrence, particularly in this region, you would say Israel has to do something. It cannot leave its territory, as it were, hit without response. It can't do that. On the other hand, if it does hit back, it could escalate. And reports coming out of Washington saying that Joe Biden told Netanyahu, we will not help you. with that. We will not take part in some further response. We regard this, we've done our bit. So again, what are you hearing about those two conflicting currents in the argument? Is it an argument? Is it the case that there's, the usual lineup, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and pushing it to hit back? Military, political establishment, Benny Gantz and others saying, hold it. What's the argument?
First of all, we have to say this is a disproportionate response by Iran on any level, right? If you say, okay, this is an Iranian compound in Damascus, this was our top general, this is a declaration of war from Iran. Now, on the one hand, you described it perfectly. On the one hand, would the United Kingdom not respond to this kind of attack on its soil? Not even in a tough neighborhood like the Middle East. Anywhere else, would you not respond? That's one thing. On the other hand, as you say, this can escalate into war. Israel is already at war in two different arenas, in Gaza and in the north, different levels, but still, this is war with Iran. This is something that the Israeli society, economy, military is not, I don't want to say not prepared for, but not geared towards in any way. So these are all kinds of questions. And you stated, we already hear Bezalel Smotrich saying, if the most right-wing of right-wing ministers saying, if Israel doesn't respond, it's an existential threat to the country. As you said, there are other more moderate forces. I don't think the issue of a response here is exactly black and white. Look, Israel, for many years, according to foreign reports, did all kinds of things in Iran, mainly to thwart two things, the Iranian nuclear program and weapons passed on from Iran to its proxies on Israel's border, mainly Hezbollah. You need to, whatever you do, talk less. And maybe there are certain things that can be done as a signal that Israel will have to, let's say, if it does it, hold back and not say it did it. So there are all kinds of sophisticated ways of sending a message without it deteriorating into a full-on escalation or war. But it's a very delicate question. And in this kind of government, we have discussed this more often than not in this podcast, what kind of government this is, what kind of pressure Benjamin Netanyahu is under. I can tell you already at 2:30 a.m., there was a, let's say, government official that was already briefing reporters saying there will be a tough response. Again, we will have to see how this plays out. I think there's a whole realm of sophisticated responses that do, again, adhere to that sending a signal, but don't deteriorate Israel into a full-out war. We have to say, Israel, in a way, received a gift tonight. And that gift is support from the international community. We haven't seen that in a while. Again, the United States and the other allies. Just imagine, Jonathan, what if we had normalization with Saudi Arabia and you had the Saudi Arabia, Jordan protecting Israel in case of this kind of war. So there's a lot to gain here if
we kind
Israel
of did have
does
that.
this. Yeah, you kind of did have that. Yeah, the Saudis could obviously step it up more if there was a normalization. But you're right. We kind of saw a dress rehearsal of what that could look like. And so Israel should be very, very sophisticated in the way it uses this very large crisis. But as I said, a very large opportunity as well.
Agree completely on that last point. On the earlier point about sophisticated ways of sending the message without tipping the whole region into a new war, here the delicacy is, on the one hand, there are all kinds of subtle responses, and Israel has deployed them in the past, including cyber attacks, famously the Stuxnet virus, etc., that method of thwarting Iran's development of a nuclear weapon. The problem here is that if it is so subtle that Israel's fingerprints are not on it, does it then send the message of deterrence, which is you cannot throw 300 plus missiles on our sovereign territory and expect to get away with it? So those below the radar, below the line responses, in a way, were fine in the era before yesterday, which was the era of proxy and indirect confrontation. What we are in now is the era of direct confrontation, and therefore does the response have to be direct? That's the question. On your point about isolation, and referring to the Economist cover Israel Alone, the other day in a slightly botched way, I tried to sort of channel the memory of the British Mandate period when the white paper restricted migration into Israel, and people said, we shall fight we'll fight the British as if there were no Nazis, and we'll fight the Nazis as if they're no British. What I think is the international position now is we will oppose Israel on Gaza as if there were no Iran, and we will stand with Israel on Iran as if there were no Gaza. We are seeing these two in separate categories. And I think the allies, the Britons, the Frances, the Joe Bidens of this world, and even, and crucially, these Arab allies, don't have any problem with that. For that, that's not complicated. We are with you against Iran. We nevertheless, at the same time, want you to change the way you're fighting the war in Gaza. I think that's a massive message for Israel, which is, you know, for all the rhetorical talk, and it always comes out of, we are a sovereign country. Always it's said. Netanyahu says it, Ben Gvir says it. We make our own decisions. Well, yes, but sovereign countries rely on their friends, and they cannot protect themselves without their friends. You cannot be alone. And therefore, all sovereignty is the same here in Britain about Brexit. All sovereignty is conditioned by interdependence, reliance on good friends and allies. I hope that we've seen the outline of what that alliance could be, but there is a price Israel has to play, which is diplomatically. It has to open up that horizon on the Palestinian question. I think what we saw in the last 24 hours is why it's worth it. It really is worth it in a most direct, physical, existential way.
I think that we will see, and this is how it connects, I think, in a way to Gaza. First of all, we should say this. Israel is not really actively fighting a war in Gaza still as we speak. The two parts of Gaza are separated by the Israeli army, but there are no more battalions fighting a war in Gaza. I don't see, maybe I'm, myopic, but I don't see how Israel after this enters Rafah, right? I mean, just generally, if the United States says no, after what we saw tonight, I don't see if that continues, how that continues to happen. I am still deeply concerned, as are many Israelis, about the fate of 133 hostage. I fear that when Sinwar is seeing what Iran is doing, and remember, Sinwar wanted any kind of flare-up besides Gaza to happen since October 7th. He was waiting for Hezbollah. He was waiting for East Jerusalem. He was waiting for the West Bank. He was waiting for the Iranians. No one did much for the Palestinians, the Hamas supporters in Gaza. This is, for him, although Iran failed in the attempt to attack Israel, but he's looking at this and waiting and wanting to see if this spirals out of control, then he has no reason to agree to any ceasefire, release of hostages, or anything. That is, I think, another reason for Israel to use its wisdom, and it has that wisdom, to try and solve not only the big regional questions, but also the Gaza question. We are in this moment of time. We are at a time more than 6 months into this war. The hostages don't have time. This is when you try and do this deal. Although we have to say Hamas refused the deal as we speak now, and Mossad have declared sort of extraordinary to say this so clearly by the Mossad, to say it's Sinwar's fault and he is essentially the one at fault for the fact that there's no deal. So as I said, it's not in his interest right now.
Completely. I mean, what a bleak conclusion to draw. I don't dispute it at all. And I saw those reports too. All that reading, Mossad saying as directly as they can, Hamas rejected the latest deal. And the calculus you've just said explains why, in part, they would, because they would think, exactly as you say, let's hope this does still spiral out inflame into the regional conflict we always wanted. We wanted it on October the 7th. Therefore, all the more reason why Israel mustn't give Sinwar what he wants, which is if a retaliation is worked in such a way that it does draw Hezbollah in, and does give Sinwar what he's always wanted, which is a war on many fronts, then, your war that would be to hand the enemy a great prize. So I don't pretend this is an easy one for those policymakers to work out, because, as we've said, the calculus is you cannot, on the one hand, allow something like this to just let go, to go unresponded to, and on the other hand, you do not want to give Hamas and Israel's many enemies a big prize. I did wonder, by the way, whether there was a loss of face for Iran. This is a small point, but I'm interested in your view of it, in the wider Muslim world in two ways. One is that it didn't work. The 99% didn't get through. But also, the imagery posted on social media late at night of rockets and missiles over Jerusalem, over the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Jerusalem has a particular, obviously, exceptional status. Quite literally, it's often exempted from these attacks because you don't dare cause damage to sites holy to Islam as well as Judaism and Christianity. There, apparently, indiscriminately, if it hadn't been for Israel and its allies operating in the skies over Jordan and Iraq, it could have been that Muslim holy sites would have been damaged or worse by Iranian missiles. I wonder how the rest of the Muslim world reacts to that, but that's perhaps an extra point.
Yeah, an extra part of the story is that it's the Israeli interceptors that protected the Dome of the Rock, right, from this kind of attack. At the end of the day, I think it's one of these events that the people who supported Iran and are anti-Israel still support Iran and say good for this country for trying to attack Israel. The people who are vehemently against Iran look at this as a failure and as a very dangerous attempt. I do want to say one more thing. I think the Israeli citizens have been utterly crushed by what happened on October 7th. Their loss of confidence in the fact that the military can come and save them is one of the deep scars of what we are still living with 6 months into this. And the fact that yesterday the military did save Israelis. Now, it's a whole different level. This time we knew it was coming. But still, just to think of the fact this is astonishing that 99% of what Iran launched towards Israel was intercepted. That does lead Israelis to, I think, in a way, regain a little bit of that confidence in their military and other defense establishment institutions. I still need to tell you, this is unbelievable. If we had sat and talked here 7 months ago, and just to think of what happened on October 7th, Hamas waging this kind of barbaric attack on Israel, what happened yesterday, Iran attacking Israel directly, who would have thought this could happen? And it does mean something about how we stand in the region. I think it's incredibly important that we withstood this attack and with really flying colors. I use the word flying intentionally, but it's important. But it still says something about, I'm sad to say, how vulnerable we are.
And how reliant on the support of friends and neighbors, including neighbors who were once themselves in a state of war with Israel. There is so much, obviously, to unpack, more that is going to become clear over the coming days. We will be back in our usual slot at the end of this week. We'll get into this with some other voices as well. All huge amounts going on. I think for now we should say stay safe, Yonit, and we'll see everyone on our usual slot on Friday morning.
And our thank yous to Guy Glaser and Omer Primat. And indeed, let's meet regularly on Friday.